My stepfather said, "You're not really family anyway," until he saw my name on his medical bills. What if the person you thought of as family, someone you were bound to by more than just blood, turned on you when you needed them the most? "Hey, my name is Elena." I still remember the exact moment the words hit me. It was like a slap to the face, one that stung long after it was spoken. My stepfather, the man who had been in my life for over a decade, had just said it so casually, so coldly. "You're not really family anyway." It wasn't in front of a crowd or some dramatic argument. It was just the two of us in the living room. I was sitting on the couch, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what I had done to deserve this. I had tried for years to make him see me as family, to prove that I belonged here, that I wasn't just the daughter of a woman he married, but someone who had learned to love him as much as anyone else in this house. But apparently, all that effort meant nothing. My heart twisted in ways I didn't know it could as his words sank in. "You're not really family anyway." My stepfather said it as if he was telling me the weather. No anger in his tone, no passion, just the finality of a truth I wasn't ready to accept. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a judgment, the kind that cuts deep because it isn't just about what's being said, it's about the fact that you've been trying to earn something that never existed. In that moment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much love and effort I poured into our relationship, he had never seen me as his. Not really. Not the way I wanted to be seen. I wanted to scream, to argue, to make him see how much I had sacrificed to fit into this family, but I stayed silent. My mother, in the kitchen just a few steps away, had heard the entire exchange. But she said nothing. She stayed in her own little world, caught somewhere between her marriage and the uncomfortable reality that her daughter wasn't truly welcome in it. That was the moment I truly understood my place in the family. I had been trying to fit in, trying to belong, trying to build some kind of bond with a man who would never truly accept me. And it hurt more than I ever thought it could. I went to my room that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do with myself. Could I keep trying? Could I keep fighting for a place I would never truly have? Or was it time to walk away from it all? I couldn't just let it go. The hurt was too fresh, too raw. I had spent years trying to earn my place, trying to prove that I belonged in this family, but now I realized I had been doing it all for nothing. I wasn't his daughter, not in the way that mattered, and that thought broke something inside me. I could feel the urge to cry, but I held it back. I refused to let him see me break. But I couldn't help but wonder, would this be the moment that pushed me to take control of my life, or would I continue to play the role of the daughter I was never going to be? And then, just as I thought I might give up entirely, a thought crossed my mind. If I was never going to truly belong, then maybe it was time to stop trying so hard. Maybe it was time to carve out my own path, my own future. Maybe this pain, this humiliation, was the push I needed to finally take control. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. My life was about to change, and it wasn't going to be because of him. After that day, everything shifted. I couldn't look at my stepfather the same way again. Every time I saw him, his words echoed in my head, and the weight of them began to carve out a space in my heart. "You're not really family anyway." It wasn't just a hurtful statement, it was a betrayal. A betrayal of everything I had worked for, everything I had tried to build. What made it even harder was that I had tried so hard for so long to be accepted. I had worked so hard to prove that I wasn't just some extra person in the house. I wasn't just my mother's daughter. I wasn't just the girl who showed up after he married her. I wanted to be seen as part of the family, wanted him to treat me like a daughter, to acknowledge that I had a place here. But it never felt like enough. And now, after all these years of playing the role of the dutiful daughter, his words had confirmed what I had always feared. I was never going to be enough. I wasn't ever going to belong in the way I had hoped. And worse, I was starting to realize that I had been the only one fighting for a relationship that was never going to be mutual. I thought back on all the smaller moments, those seemingly insignificant, overlooked instances that I had brushed aside. The way he looked past me when I spoke. The times I would try to share something about my life, and he would either change the subject or ignore me entirely. The countless times I would make dinner, cleaning up afterward, doing what I could to contribute to the family, only to have him sit there, his eyes glued to the TV, not even acknowledging my presence. But it wasn't just him. It was also my mother, the one person who should have been my advocate, the one person who should have had my back. She had always been caught between her loyalty to her husband and her love for me. But that day, when I heard those words come out of my stepfather's mouth, I had expected her to step in, to defend me, to tell him that I was family. Instead, she stayed silent, washing dishes in the kitchen like it was just another day. I didn't expect her to choose sides, but I needed her to at least show some empathy, some support. But she didn't, and that hurt more than anything. The silence that followed his words made me feel like I was invisible. The person I thought would protect me, the one who had been my rock for so many years, was complicit in his dismissal. Those quiet betrayals, those moments of invisibility, had chipped away at me slowly over time. But now the truth was undeniable. I had been living in a family that never really saw me. My mother had never fully understood what I needed. My stepfather had always kept me at arm's length. And every time I tried to break through those walls, they just got higher. It wasn't just about my stepfather's words. It was about everything that had come before them. The neglect, the disinterest, the emotional distance. It was about all the times I had been made to feel like an outsider in my own home. I wasn't even sure I could call it my home anymore. There was a weight in my chest, something heavy that I couldn't shake. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, to move past it, I knew I couldn't. These were scars that ran deeper than I had ever imagined, scars that I had tried to hide for so long. But now, with the truth laid bare, I knew I had to confront them. Could I confront the hidden wounds, or would they remain buried forever? I didn't know, but what I did know was that I couldn't keep living like this, pretending that everything was okay when I felt so invisible. I couldn't keep pretending that I was part of something when I knew I was never truly welcomed. I had a choice to make, and for the first time, I realized I didn't have to keep enduring this quiet betrayal. It was time to take control. It was time to stop pretending and start making decisions for myself. The days that followed were a blur of contemplation. I kept thinking about my stepfather's words, hearing them over and over in my head, letting them echo in the empty spaces of my heart. You're not really family anyway. The truth of those words sunk deeper than I wanted to admit, but it also opened something within me, something I had buried for far too long. I had spent so much of my life fighting for a place in this family, trying to earn the love and recognition I thought I deserved, but now I was faced with a harsh reality. None of that would ever matter. It hurt. It hurt like nothing else. The years I had spent trying to make him see me as more than just my mother's daughter, those years felt wasted. But there was something else rising within me, a surge of anger mixed with something else, something more powerful. It was the realization that I didn't have to prove myself to anyone anymore. Not to him, not to my mother, not to anyone. I had been so focused on earning a place in their lives that I had forgotten one crucial thing. I had my own life to live. I didn't need to keep clinging to a family that didn't value me. The truth was, I had been giving my energy, my love, and my care to people who couldn't see me for who I really was. I had spent all this time sacrificing pieces of myself for a family that couldn't even accept me, and it was time to stop. But stopping wasn't easy. My mind raced with 100 different thoughts, 100 reasons to keep pushing through, to keep trying to find a way to fit in. But then I realized something. I was suffocating. I was drowning in a world where I was never really accepted, and it was taking a toll on me mentally, emotionally, and physically. I wasn't just losing myself to the weight of their rejection. I was losing my ability to stand on my own 2 feet. And that's when it hit me. I didn't need to keep begging for their approval. I didn't need to keep trying to force myself into their mold. What I needed was to step away, to take control of my life, to redefine what family meant to me, and to stop letting people who never truly saw me dictate my happiness. It wasn't just a choice between staying or leaving anymore. It was a decision to reclaim my life, to take back my peace, my self-worth, and my future. I could choose to remain the daughter who was always trying to prove she belonged, or I could choose to become the woman who no longer needed anyone's validation. The question was no longer whether I would remain in this toxic family dynamic, but whether I had the courage to break free from it. The fear of what would happen if I stepped away lingered in my mind. What would my mother think? What would my stepfather say? But as I stood in front of the mirror that evening, something inside me shifted. The woman staring back at me wasn't the quiet, obedient daughter I had always been. She wasn't someone who needed to earn love or approval. She was strong, capable, and ready to take on whatever came next. I realized I was the one who had been holding myself back. It was time to take the first step toward something new, something that was mine. It was time to stop looking for validation outside of myself and start looking inward. I could feel the weight lifting, little by little. With each passing second, I could feel myself gaining clarity, gaining control. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to keep waiting around for someone to finally see me. I was going to start seeing myself, and that was all that mattered. As I walked away from the mirror, I knew this was the beginning of something big. A journey I had been too afraid to start for far too long. I didn't know where it would take me, but I knew it was going to be mine. All mine. The fear still lingered, but now it was replaced with something stronger: courage. I was ready to change my life, ready to let go of the past, and finally start living for myself. Could I find the courage to change my life, or would I hesitate when it mattered most? The answer was clear. I was no longer going to let fear decide my future. The decision had been made. I was taking control of my life. But now, there was another question hanging in the air. What was I going to do about it? What was the next step in my journey toward freedom and empowerment? I didn't want to just leave things behind. I wanted to show the people who had belittled me, who had made me feel like I wasn't truly part of their lives, that I wasn't someone they could discard so easily. I couldn't pretend that I wasn't angry. I couldn't ignore the deep-rooted frustration, the resentment that had built up over the years. But more than that, I couldn't let this pain, this rejection, go unanswered. I had spent so much time trying to fit in, to be accepted, but the truth was I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, their affection, or their validation. But I still wanted something. I wanted them to understand the impact of their words. I wanted them to feel the weight of their rejection. I wanted them to see that I wasn't just some girl who could be ignored, dismissed, and discarded. I began to plan. It wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to make their lives miserable or hurt them in any obvious way. It was about showing them that I was capable of more than they ever thought. I wasn't going to stand in the shadows anymore, waiting for a moment of validation from them. No, this was going to be something bigger, something more profound. This was about showing them, in the most direct way possible, that I had become someone they couldn't ignore. The first step in my plan was simple. I was going to take control of my financial future. I had always been careful with money, but I had spent far too long relying on my mother and my stepfather for support. I wasn't going to wait around anymore for them to give me what I deserved. I was going to build my own wealth, create my own success, and make them see that I didn't need them to survive. I started researching investment opportunities, looking into how I could grow my income outside of my regular job. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for the challenge. I didn't need to ask for their help anymore, and I certainly wasn't going to wait for them to offer it. The second step was reclaiming my independence in every sense of the word. I had always been dependent on my mother, and even though I had the means to live on my own, I stayed because I was trying to hold on to something that I thought was worth fighting for. But I realized that I was never going to find peace in that house. I was never going to find freedom in that environment, and the longer I stayed, the more I allowed their rejection to define me. So, I made a decision. I was moving out. I was going to find my own place, my own space where I could build a life that was truly mine. The idea of living on my own was both exciting and terrifying, but I knew it was the right choice. I was no longer going to let them control where I lived, or how I felt about myself. As I began making plans to leave, I couldn't help but wonder what they would think when they realized I was serious. Would my mother even notice? Would she care? Would my stepfather care? Part of me hoped they would be shocked, would feel the sting of losing me. But deep down, I knew I was doing this for myself. Not for them. I was building a life that was entirely mine, one where I wouldn't have to worry about whether or not I was accepted. But the real question in my mind was this: would they realize what they had lost? Would they understand the magnitude of their actions, of their rejection? Was this the payback I was looking for, or would it simply leave me feeling empty, still longing for something I would never get from them? I wasn't sure, but what I did know was that I was done waiting. I was done fighting for something that would never be mine. It was time for me to take control of my life, my future, and my peace of mind. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself, finding my own path, and stepping into a future where I was in charge. Would I feel victorious when it's over, or will the consequences leave me feeling empty? I couldn't say yet, but one thing was for sure: I wasn't going to let the past control me anymore. The day I moved out of the house was like any other day at first, but the weight of my decision made everything feel different. I had spent weeks planning, saving, and preparing, but as I stood there, loading the last of my things into the car, I couldn't shake the feeling of finality. This wasn't just about moving to a new apartment. It was about leaving behind a life that I had been trying to hold together, even though I never truly belonged. The first few steps out of that house felt heavy. I wasn't running away from my mother, and I wasn't abandoning her either. But I knew I couldn't keep living in a place that made me feel like an outsider. I couldn't keep sacrificing pieces of myself for the hope that someday my stepfather would see me differently. I had made my choice. I was done. The apartment I found was small, but it was mine. It had no ghosts, no memories of rejection, no reminders of the man who had dismissed me so easily. It was a blank slate. I started to unpack my things, organizing them into neat little spaces that were mine and mine alone. For the first time in years, I felt the freedom of being completely in charge of my life. There was no one to question me, no one to look past me. It was just me. But even as I settled in, there was still one question that lingered in my mind. What would my stepfather think? What would my mother say when she found out I had finally left? A few days after the move, my mother called me. Her voice was hesitant, tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone more concerned than I had expected. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just starting over." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Elena, are you sure this is what you want?" I wanted to say so many things to her, how I had felt invisible for so long, how her silence in that moment when my stepfather spoke those hurtful words had cut deeper than she would ever understand. But I didn't. I had learned over the years that expressing my pain to her was like talking to a wall. I wasn't sure she would ever get it. So, instead, I simply said, "Yes, Mom. I'm sure." The conversation ended with her promise to come by and visit. But deep down, I knew she didn't fully understand. I didn't think she ever would, but I didn't need her to. I was starting to understand that my journey wasn't about winning her approval or getting her to see things my way. It was about finding peace within myself, about learning to trust that the decisions I was making were the right ones for me. That night, after I had settled in, I got the call. It was from my stepfather. He wasn't a man who called me much, certainly not for anything other than something he needed. I braced myself for the conversation, unsure of what he wanted or what he might say. "Elena," his voice was gruff on the other end, "your mom told me you left." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, that familiar anger bubbling up, but I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to let him get to me anymore. "Yes, I did," I replied coolly. There was silence on the other end, a long pause. I could tell he was trying to process it, trying to figure out what to say next. "Why?" he finally asked, though it seemed more like an accusation than a question. "Because," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I don't belong there. Not with you, not with your indifference, and not with the way you've treated me. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I've made my decision." His response was quick and sharp. "You're just going to walk away like that?" I didn't flinch. "Yes, I am." There was another silence, one that lasted far too long, and then, almost as if it was an afterthought, he said, "Fine. Do what you want." And with that, the conversation ended. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was a sense of relief that washed over me. I had finally spoken my truth. I had stopped hiding. I had stopped pretending that their rejection didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I was free from the constant need to seek their approval, to make them see me as family. And as I stood there, looking out of my window at the city skyline, something inside me shifted. The weight of years of emotional neglect, of constantly being dismissed, began to lift. The pain wasn't gone, but it didn't control me anymore. I was in control now. The man who had never truly seen me, who had never given me the love I deserved, would never have the power to hurt me again. I had taken back what was mine. Would I feel relieved after this, or would it leave me questioning everything? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew this. I was done questioning my worth. It was time to move forward. The days after I moved out were a blur. I was adjusting to my new life, the quiet of my own space, and the freedom to finally live on my own terms. But there was still a lingering ache, something I couldn't shake. The silence between me and my mother hung heavy. Her attempts to reach out felt distant, her support conditional. My stepfather's call still echoed in my mind, his indifference still ringing in my ears. I had made the decision to leave, to take control, but part of me still wondered if it was the right one. I'd hoped that walking away would bring instant peace, but it didn't. The emotional scars from years of rejection didn't disappear just because I moved out. I had expected some sort of clarity, a moment where I would feel completely free, but the truth was more complicated. Every time I passed a familiar place, every time I thought of my mother, I felt a pang of guilt. Was I wrong for leaving? Was I abandoning them, or was this simply a step toward my own healing? The silence became louder. I spent my nights questioning whether I had made the right choice. There were moments when I wished I could take it all back, just to avoid the pain of cutting ties. But I knew deep down that the only way I could move forward was by facing the truth. I had been living for everyone else, and now it was time to live for me. Weeks passed, and the emptiness began to fade. I started to find myself again, without the weight of rejection, without the need to seek validation from a family who never fully accepted me. I began to breathe easier, sleep more soundly. My sense of self, once fragile and dependent on others, slowly started to rebuild. I had created a life for myself, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. As for my stepfather and my mother, they were no longer my problem. They would have to find their own way, just as I had found mine. The silence wasn't as deafening anymore. In the end, I realized that leaving wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them regret what they had done or proving anything to them. It was about reclaiming my own peace, my own dignity, and my own life. I didn't need them to accept me. I had already accepted myself. The pain was still there, but it no longer had control over me. I was ready to step into my future, free from the ties that had once bound me to a family that never truly saw me. And with that, I finally felt the quiet peace I had been longing for.